Over 90% of children have experienced offline indirect racism at least once or twice a month. And 25% actually up here have experienced it almost every day. So Asian American children are facing a huge increase in racism. Whether someone has been physically assaulted or verbally insulted, racism is a form of trauma. So let's talk about the acute short-term effects that trauma, which includes racism, has on children and their mental health. When we encounter a traumatic event, our body produces a stress reaction, and that is normal. For most people, this normal reaction can include feeling discomfort, confusion, sadness, anger. They might have trouble sleeping, ruminating thoughts, difficulty focusing, thinking, and they'll feel distressed for a few days. But afterwards, their mind will process it, they'll calm down and return to baseline. However, for some people, they might have stronger distress symptoms and they keep persisting past just a few days. This is what we call an adjustment disorder. Adjustment disorders can last up to 3 months. The symptoms of adjustment disorder can range from feelings of depression to anxiety to acting out in anger or withdrawing and isolating. These symptoms are what I would call uh, a cry for help. If you notice your child is acting like this for more than just a few days, this is the time to take action and try to help them. If someone experiences really serious trauma, such as being assaulted, then they can develop something called acute stress disorder. The signs and symptoms they experience are much stronger than in adjustment disorder and can include severe anxiety, dissociation, trouble remembering the event, flashbacks of the situation, nightmares, hypervigilance, and avoiding all things that remind them of the trauma. For some people with acute stress disorder, their symptoms can get better within a month. However, a lot of people don't get better. And if those symptoms persist longer, then they have something called PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. So these are the short-term effects of trauma. Let's move on to the long-term effects of trauma on mental health. Specifically, if someone is exposed to racism a lot, what can happen to them? So I mentioned earlier that most people will have a normal reaction to racism and go back to their baseline in a few days. But just because this person does not develop a mental illness doesn't mean there are no negative long-term consequences. There's an idea called internalized racism, which means a minority person feels they are inferior to the mainstream majority. And this can be a consequence of experiencing racism. They tend to have poor self-esteem and view the world as a negative and dangerous place. This is going to impact a person's confidence to pursue their dreams and relationships, and also the ability to show themselves the care and grace they deserve. This is a picture from a 1940s psychological experiment called the doll test, where African American children were asked which color doll they preferred, the black versus white doll. And the majority picked the white doll and assigned positive attributes to them. And it really was able to show how racism can lead to deep feelings of shame against their own cultures, even from a young age. Another way to assess the long-term effects of racism is by understanding the concept of ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. ACEs include childhood abuse, neglect, bullying, community violence, and racism. The impact of ACEs on children have been studied extensively. When children are exposed to ACEs, they have a decreased sense of safety and security. Research shows that this can impact their mental health, leading to lower education, lower job potential, chronic mental illness, and increase in suicide risk. This can also have physical health effects because individuals with more ACEs tend to not take care of their body and also engage in riskier behaviors, such as getting sexually transmitted diseases, heart disease, or diabetes. And here you can see that as the number of ACEs increase, the risk of having a mental illness increases as well. You can see here that the more ACEs someone has, the higher chance of having academic problems. When you have 3 or more ACEs, 80% of these children are going to be struggling in school. As you can see, exposure to racism is pretty harmful to the mental health of our children. It can have many long-term effects. So what can we as parents do to not only help our children deal with this adversity, but also grow and thrive? Unfortunately, since it's not that easy to change racism immediately, and we all are having to live through it right now, what we want is that when our children are exposed to it, they have the mental strength and support to minimize their distress level and the length of time they are experiencing this distress. Hopefully, it doesn't have to progress into adjustment disorder or PTSD. And how do we do that? Well, in psychiatry, we believe that there is a trait that really helps people bounce back from adversity, and that trait is called resilience. And I'll talk about how we can promote resilience in both the long term as well as what we can do now in the short term. So, how do we raise resilient children? Well, it all starts from when your children were babies. Psychiatrists have studied the interactions of parents with their babies and then followed them through time into adulthood and found that certain types of parents were able to raise more resilient children. It starts when babies feel safe with their parents, and we call that their needs are met. As a baby, the needs are very basic. Are they fed? Are they comfortable? Are you interacting with them? But as children grow older, their needs get more complex, and that can include help with schoolwork, encouraging them to make friends, learning to do chores, and becoming an independent person, also feeling safe in their environment. So when a baby or child's needs are met, they feel comfortable to go out and explore the world. And during this time, a parent cheers them on from the side and delights in their new discoveries. Sometimes when they're exploring, they encounter something stressful, but because they have a safe relationship with their parent, they know mom and dad are watching out for them, they feel comfortable going back to them for support and help. After recharging and regaining their confidence with parents, they then feel comfortable going out again and exploring some more. This is a really positive cycle that we call secure attachment. Out of this cycle, children slowly build resilience over time. So resilience isn't something that can just happen in the short term. It's something that builds on itself from the countless challenges children face and how they are able to overcome them. So hopefully in the future, even when parents are not around, people carry a message in their mind that even though the world is scary sometimes, I am going to be okay. And my overall view of the world is still positive. For example, one of the stressors our children are experiencing right now is racism. And we want them to feel that despite racism, the world is still a safe place. So in the future, they continue to feel comfortable going out and exploring the world and doing what they like to do. By the way, Circle of Security is a parenting model that is designed for babies to 6-year-olds. I don't have time to talk about it today, but I will share their website at the end for those who are interested in learning more. The underlying principle is something that benefits children of all ages because secure attachment style parenting doesn't just end at 6 years of age. There was a study done in 2006 that really was able to show the best antidote to trauma is building a strong sense of security in our children. This group looked at over 700 African American adolescents aged 10 to 12. They interviewed them 3 times over 5 years, and they found that even though they faced a lot of racial discrimination, the ones who had a lot of social support from their family and friends had less depressive symptoms compared to those who didn't. Resilience takes time to develop. So let's talk more about what we can do right now to help our children through the current wave of anti-Asian racism, as well as promote their growth and development. I'll be talking about tips to help build a more secure attachment between you and your child in this moment, and to help them feel safe. So even though the world is scary right now, they won't feel traumatized in the long term. First, in helping children feel better right now, we have to meet their needs. What does that mean in the context of increases in anti-Asian violence? Well, the fact that you are all here listening to me tonight means that you are already doing a very good job anticipating that this is something that is potentially scary for your child to deal with and you're looking for help. So after anticipating their needs, it's very important to check in with your child about what they need. Ask how they are feeling about this. Do they have questions? What do they know about it? And listen very carefully to what they have to say in order to understand what kind of support they need from you. Sometimes parents also have a difficult time anticipating their child's needs. So it's a good habit to regularly check in with your child and ask them what they need. What you are doing here is making sure your child is prepared to handle the adversity they are going to face while they are going out and exploring the world. Just because there are dangers in the world, such as racism, we can't keep them cooped up at home and not allow them to go to school or interact with others. However, in the same way, you're not going to send a child into a rainstorm without an umbrella. You don't want to send your child out into a world with racism without understanding what they can do to protect themselves. It's important to talk about this preemptively, even if they don't talk about it. It's natural to want to protect your children from harsh realities, but avoiding it will only increase their anxiety. Talking about it and having a plan helps decrease that anxiety. When your child is out interacting and exploring the world, you need to be able to recognize when they are struggling. So it's important to recognize the signs and symptoms of distress in children. Younger children tend to have different reactions to trauma and stress compared to older children. They tend to withdraw, no longer be interested in playing. They also sometimes regress to more babyish behaviors such as throwing tantrums, bedwetting. They can also become preoccupied with a traumatic event, wanting to replay it through their games or repeatedly asking you about it or having nightmares. They can have a lot of anxiety, becoming very clingy and irritable, have trouble sleeping. They can have physical symptoms such as headaches and stomach aches. Furthermore, with young children, allow for delayed reactions. They may seem fine right afterwards, but sometimes they become distressed a few weeks or even months later. For older children, their reactions are more similar to adults. There's two general categories they tend to behave in. It's either shutting down or feeling overly activated. In the shutting down category, children tend to withdraw, describe themselves as feeling numb. They want to avoid the stressor, either talking about it or going near the location where it happened. They might have poor concentration or memory of the event. They might lose touch with their daily routines, and they could turn to substance use to further numb themselves, such as alcohol, cigarettes, and drugs. Finally, academic performance is going to be affected and grades are going to get worse. In the overly activated group, they might be hypervigilant, emotional, anxious, being very protective of friends and family, having intrusive thoughts of the event, feelings of guilt, feeling afraid, having disturbed sleep, and physical symptoms such as fatigue, nausea, dizziness, headaches, sweating, etc. This group will also have trouble with academic performance as well. So you're picking up on the signs that your child is could be struggling. How do you know when you need to seek professional help or if you can handle it at home? I like to take some time to mention that Asian Americans have some of the lowest utilization rates when it comes to seeking professional mental health help. And it's not because we are struggling less compared to other groups out there, but we may have more stigma against seeking help for a variety of reasons. I want parents to know that it's okay to seek help. It's a safe environment, and when you see a psychiatrist or therapist, it's confidential. Having a mental illness is not a sign of weakness. It's just like any other illness. Sometimes it gets better on its own, sometimes it doesn't. If the Asian American community as a whole can be more accepting of professional mental health help, we can take a big step together towards improving our overall well being. Now, let's talk about when you need to seek professional help. First and foremost, if your child's behavior is dangerous, reckless, or harmful, such as using drugs, or if they're feeling suicidal or homicidal, they need more intense help. Another sign is if you notice that they have been depressed and anxious for weeks and it's not getting any better. Or you notice they seem to be struggling, but they're not communicating with you at all about how they're feeling, what they're doing, where they're going. If they continue to have stress symptoms that aren't getting better, nightmares, physical sensations, hypervigilance, etc. If you notice that their relationships with you and their friends are suffering, they're not talking and hanging out with friends anymore. When they're home, they stay in their room all day instead of coming out to interact. Also, if you notice they're not functioning in school, their grades are dropping, they're also not functioning at home, they're not doing their chores, their homework, or even grooming themselves. And lastly, trust your judgment as a parent. If you're feeling worried about them for any reason at all, just bring them in for a professional evaluation. So after checking with your child about what they need and you're watching out for if they are struggling, the next thing you can do is advocate for your child. You want to make sure they are safe when they are outside their home, whether that's school, friends' houses, any extracurriculars. It's always a good idea to keep an open line of communication with teachers and principals. Let them know that you are aware of this current trend of anti-Asian violence and for the teacher to monitor for it in the classrooms, lunchrooms, and recess. Obviously, if your child tells you someone at school is being racist to them, let the teachers and principals know and to follow up to make sure they did something and your child is feeling comfortable and safe at school. Also, you want to know who your child's friends are and their families, making sure that those are also safe, non-discriminatory environments, and checking in with your child's friends' parents if you do have concerns. Now let's talk about the specifics of how to talk to your child and how to show them support. I know I mentioned it earlier, but a common question I get from parents is, how exactly do I talk to my child? So here I'm going to go through some concrete examples of how to do it. I have divided it into three age groups: 3 to 6 year olds, 7 to 11 year olds, and 12 years and older, based on their developmental characteristics. The general idea of how to support them doesn't really change over the years. You want them to know that you care, you're listening, and you're here to help. And these tips work for if you're talking to your child preemptively or if they already experienced something negative and you're trying to help them cope. So, how do you talk to and support a 3 to 6 year old? Children at this age are cognitively undeveloped. They are still unaware of many things. Most don't understand the concept of race. They may notice that others can be different from them. So, what you're doing with these children is teaching them about race and helping them become aware that racism is something that can happen and that it is bad. You can use children's books to help you teach your child that it's okay to be different and that we have to respect each other's differences. When you're having the conversation with them, keep things very simple, nothing abstract. Ask them how they feel if someone made fun of them because of their differences. You want to help them understand that it's okay to have negative feelings if someone makes fun of them. Validate their feelings. Your goal is to help your child understand that their feelings and self image is important, so they feel proud and confident in themselves. If your child comes to you in distress, you don't need to jump to problem solving immediately. Really make them feel that you understand what they are going through. Children at this age respond very well to physical comfort, so you'll want to give them lots of hugs, kisses, hold their hands. Next, let's talk about the 7 to 11 year olds, or the latency age. What makes this group different than the younger children is that they are starting to become more cognitively developed. They likely have an understanding of race because they've learned about it in the classroom. In general, they are more aware of what's going on in the world. They also tend to have more fears and anxiety, so they might have more nightmares, fears of abandonment, and they understand mortality more now. Conversations with this group are going to be much more complex. You likely don't need to teach them about race anymore because they'll already know. Start off once again with asking about how they're feeling about the current atmosphere of anti Asian racism, if they have any questions about it. And likely they'll have a lot of questions because they probably heard about it from their friends or on social media if they have access to that. Children in this age are very focused on themselves and their immediate family. So their questions are largely going to be, am I safe? Can you keep me safe? Is this going to happen to me or us? And once again, you want to validate their feelings before jumping to problem solving. It's important to reassure these children that despite these scary events, that they are going to be okay, and redirect them back to their normal everyday routines in their lives. Let them know that this is just a moment in time. There's going to be a million moments in time where they're going to be having fun again. You also want to teach them ways to ask for help from teachers and adults. Now let's move on to the last group, the teenagers. Teenagers are different from latency age children in that they're cognitively much more advanced and developed. They're exposed to a lot more information, such as through the internet, TV, social media, and their scope of concern regarding current events isn't going to be just limited to themselves and their family, but society in general. So conversations with teenagers are going to be a lot more sophisticated. It's going to be like talking to another adult or almost another adult. However, the main theme of how you show your support as a parent is not going to change much. Once again, you're going to want to validate their feelings. You also have to recognize that teens are in the process of discovering themselves and want more privacy. What that means for you is that they may have a very different opinion than you on anti Asian racism, and you should respect their opinion. Don't try to force them to agree with you. Also, respect their boundaries. Teens usually don't want to be touchy feely anymore with their parents. Sometimes, and sometimes, you're putting in a really good effort to have a conversation with them, and they just don't want to engage. And that's okay. They'd rather talk to their friends. But let them know you are always available if they do want to talk. Simple reassurances often don't work as well for teens compared to younger children. So, a good way to help them deal with their anxiety regarding the world is to help them use the critical thinking skills they have learned in school to better understand the situation and look for ways to help. When you're helping your teen research the topic, make sure they're using legitimate websites, and you should always monitor their social media use and make sure that it's safe. Help them recognize that even though there are many bad things happening, there are a lot of people who are trying to help, and help them research who is raising awareness and what is being done. And if they're interested, empower them to get involved. Some things they can do include sending sympathy messages to affected people, fundraising activities, or other activism related activities at school. Right. And that concludes my discussion for tonight. Here are some resources you might find helpful. At Hamilton-Madison House, we provide a variety of mental health services as well as referral and coordination services. We also have a program dedicated to those impacted by COVID called Project COVID. NYC Well is a hotline service provided by New York City that you may use to call for help at any time. And I mentioned Circle of Security earlier. If you want to do some online research yourself, I've included the website. There are also classes that you can take to learn about it too. All right, well, thank you so much for listening tonight. Does anyone have any questions?
So Dr. Wang, we had some questions when people register for the event. So I want to read aloud. I think you've covered a lot of these questions that people had, but there were a few questions that I think maybe you didn't respond to. And if you did already and I maybe missed it, feel free to reiterate. So you did talk about the kinds of resources that parents have to discuss this topic of anti-Asian racism with their kids. And thank you so much for making it age appropriate based on elementary or middle school or high school levels. And talking a little too about how parents can support their kids emotionally when they experience racism. One of the questions that parents submitted was, should they show or let their kids see images of violence? Because we talked to you about how there's so much social media content flying around, media content flying around. It's sometimes hard to control what our kids see or not. But I think we didn't get necessarily the age level of the kids that this parent's talking about, but maybe in general, if you want to just respond to that question.
Yeah, sure. Usually for social media use and the content, movie ratings are a good standard to go by. So if you have a young child in elementary school, you don't want to show them any images that are rated R or PG-13. And same goes for the middle schoolers and high schoolers even. Anything too graphic and disturbing is not going to help them in their kind of processing of this situation. It's just going to scare them. So definitely not just related to this anti-Asian violence, but just in general, you should be monitoring your child's social media use because there's a lot of content out there that is pretty inappropriate for children, and oftentimes they don't know what's safe and what's not safe.
Thank you for that. I'm actually going to ask you to stop your screen share, Dr. Wang, just so we can see your face as you respond.
Sure. All right.
Thank you. And if any of these questions are going to overlap with the next workshop, you can just say that you plan to, or the Project Hope team will refer to these questions later on. But one parent asked, what is a good response for a tween to say when they are experiencing or witnessing racism amongst their peers?
I think, the kind of basic answer to that would always just to validate your teen's feelings. So if just check in to see how they are feeling and really get a hold on kind of what they are experiencing, and just reflect that back to them, and validate their feelings. It helps ground them in their kind of overwhelming sense of feeling emotions that they might be experiencing, and lets them really understand that you're here for them and you really get what's going on with them. So if they say, my friend got bullied today for, and the bully made fun of something about them, you can always say, how does that make you feel? And they might say, well, worried, or I'm afraid that might happen to me. And, and you validate that feeling. Yeah, that's really scary and uncomfortable. And, I'm sorry you're feeling this way. And just kind of stay there with them in the moment, and eventually they'll calm down and they'll let you know, like, hey, thanks for, listening to me and being here for me. Sometimes less is more, but don't try to get them to feel better immediately. Sometimes people just need to be in that moment for a bit, and you should be patient until they can feel better. Negating their feeling or saying, oh, don't feel bad, or you'll feel better soon, really invalidates how they're feeling in the moment.
So it seems like that's a good place to start, just having your kids ground themselves in what they're feeling. I think the parent was also asking for a little bit of guidance about how they could coach their tween to respond to that incident. So, I mean, that's definitely a good starting place before we even launch into advice. But do you have any additional advice or guidance for how parents might coach their kids to respond to an incident of anti-Asian racism?
Yeah, it's also a really good opportunity for both the parent and the kid to practice advocacy in school. So, if the kid is seeing this racist incident play out and they feel that it's safe for them to intervene, you can work on, like, what can you go and do to kind of extract your peer from this incident and get them out of the situation. Can you walk up to them and just be like, hey, like, let's talk, and just move them out of the situation? Um, Sometimes confronting the bully works, oftentimes it may not work. It depends on the situation, but you don't want to escalate it and, get into a fight over it. I think the best thing is to de-escalate the situation, get your friend out of it, and then go and find a teacher or adult in the school and let them know what is happening. And it's important for the parent too to just let the school know that they're aware that this is happening, and to keep following up to make sure that things are being done.
And I would make a plug. We work with an organization that provides trainings around how youth can stand up for themselves when they face racism or prejudice. The Center for Anti-Violence Education provides youth trainings for middle and high school students. So I encourage you, their youth trainer is great. So I encourage parents, if they want to provide that as a resource for their kids, to sign up at caeny.org. The other question that a parent had was, how much should we or parents teach about the history of the Asian American experience? At what age is it appropriate? So for example, when can we talk about the origins of the slur, like Oriental?
Okay, that's a really great question. I'll go by kind of the age I posted earlier. So the 3 to 6 year olds are probably, it's probably too advanced for them. I think for them, if they can get a good grasp of racism exists, I might face racism and it's bad. I think that's probably as far as you're going to get with them. But with the elementary school and middle schoolers, yeah, you can definitely start kind of teaching them some of the history of that. And obviously, don't go into the gory and gruesome details, but let them know that this is, a chronic issue, and what we're experiencing now isn't anything new. It's kind of a acute exacerbation on something chronic. And for the high schoolers, having them do some research into it themselves and then sitting down and talking about it as a family, you can probably get them to have a little bit more interest and contribution instead of you just talking at them. Sometimes teenagers tend to not listen so well when you just talk at them.
Yeah. And I also think that's why it's important for schools to be able to integrate some of this learning in classes so that they can hear it from other sources and also their peers are learning it. And I would say, I think for me, my mom was, we were immigrants, and she definitely doesn't know about the history of the Asian community in the US. So I think it could also be a learning opportunity for parents. I think her question to me was, why is this happening all of a sudden? And so for her, she didn't have the context for the history of exclusion of the Asian community. So thank you for that. A question that another parent had was, will anti-Asian racism affect identity formation? I think you talked a little bit about this in terms of mental health impact, which is obviously, it is tied to a little bit of sense of security and safety, but did you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think, I think it definitely can. Even if it doesn't have a mental health, impact in the sense you don't get an anxiety disorder or depression or anything like that. People who are consistently discriminated against tend to have lower self-esteem and, value themselves less because they're basically repeatedly told that you are um, less worthy compared to other people. So there's so much shame that develops from that. So absolutely, if you let racism happen unchecked, and there's no one on your side telling you like, hey, that's wrong, that's bad, don't listen to that. You might get that internalized message that there is something worse about me.
And I see in the chat, it's great that as Chinatown schools like PS 130 is integrating knowledge about Asian American and Pacific Islander community resources and knowledge and things like that. So really great to hear that's happening during the month of May. We have two more questions, and then I think we'll get close to time, but if people on the call want to ask the question out loud on their language lines, your interpreter will be able to hear it, and we'll type it in the chat. We'll translate it into the chat so we can get to your questions as well. So inviting you to do that. So the second to last question is, how should we as adults, as parents, respond to hateful speech when it comes from children?
Like the children are saying hateful speech about themselves.
I think they mean by children of other races, potentially making anti-Asian comments to Asian adults.
I see. So if their parents are nearby, that's the best person to go to and let them know that their child just said this to you, and obviously do this in a calm and respectful manner, but let them know that that was very inappropriate and not okay, and and it was very hurtful for you and your child who experienced that.
Thank you. So involving their parents as part of the education process.
Yeah.
And then last question we have here is, how can, I think you talked a little bit about this, but I'm also, and Rennie, feel free to jump in, if for parents whose first language is not English, but they do want to figure out how to advocate for their kids, for themselves, if there's other resources that we haven't mentioned, how can we empower parents to speak up and speak out, and also have them empower their children to do the same? If you could share your thoughts, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm curious, what are the resources schools have to communicate with parents who are not fluent in English? Are there translators or staff available who can help them with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, the schools are always available and translations are available, especially in the Chinatown area. But every school, it doesn't matter which school in New York City, we're all required to have translation services or interpreters. They have it available, over the phone or even in person. So our first outreach is always to who can translate at the school level, and we have so many staff who are willing and able to do that. So yeah, just always never be afraid to reach out to the school and communicate. I think communication, I think Dr. Wang really hit the nail on the head tonight, is so important. Not to let the child just keep it in, but validate and make them visible. Never want a child to feel invisible. So important.
Thank you, Rennie. So I think I invited people to ask questions, but I'm not actually sure they can. It sounds like maybe they might not be able to speak on their language lines, but as we close, there is an opportunity to ask questions that we might not have gotten to. And then in the upcoming 2 workshops, we can be sure that we get to those questions. So before we close, I just really want to thank you, Dr. Wang, for sharing your knowledge. I feel like I learned a lot. And I feel that, whether educators or community members or parents, it's all really useful knowledge because this is not information that any of us really grew up with. So it's really helpful to see, thinking too about how does that knowledge or exposure to that kind of experience affect kids, but then also there are ways that we can support them so too we can build their resilience and sense of safety. And thank you, Rennie, for outreaching to parents and getting them all into this room. And I hope more the same folks will join us in the future weeks, and also we'll have more folks joining this conversation. So we want to hear from you. We have a survey in Chinese, Korean, and Spanish that just asks you, how this event was for you, what you found most valuable, what questions that you had that maybe weren't answered. We'd love to hear from you. It should take you just a few minutes, so we would really appreciate your feedback. And Sylvia just dropped it in the chat. And we mentioned that this is the first of a series of workshops that we're doing with Hamilton-Madison House. So there are 2 more workshops that are coming up that touches on different aspects of supporting our kids. So the next session I think is going to be really interesting to a lot of folks is May 11th. So same Tuesday at the same exact time, next Tuesday at 6 p.m. We're going to be talking about how do we parent our kids during COVID. So we'll talk about specifically about the anti-Asian violence, but really also the uncertainty that our kids are experiencing during COVID. There's been so much upheaval and anxiety and worry that we as adults have felt. So we definitely we know that our kids have been impacted, and we want to make sure that we can support them in the best ways possible. And definitely you can register. The registration link is in the chat, and you can also submit a question ahead of time, just like today. And then the last workshop of this series is on May 18th, again, Tuesday at 6 p.m. The third session is we're going to talk about why taking care of ourselves is really is going to help our children navigate this difficult time. Sometimes, as the Asian community members, we have never really, it's not part of our cultures necessarily to take care of ourselves. We put our families, our children first, and we don't think about how feeling stressed and burned out and fearful ourselves can affect our kids, but we know there's a spillover effect. So we want to make sure that we do take care of ourselves in order to best support our kids. And a few more things, and we can definitely share this with the folks who registered and who are on here. We are holding a number of self-defense trainings in Asian languages in May. We have one coming up in English, Japanese, Korean, and Chinese. And we may be adding one in Tagalog and Vietnamese. So please follow us on social media for more information. And we're also happy to share it with Rennie and the Chinatown School principal so that you can get that information. It'll be on Zoom just like this and just teaching you strategies so that you can keep yourself safe so that if you're ever targeted in the streets or in public places, you don't feel that you don't know how to respond. So I think that is it. We saved 2 minutes of your evening today. So thank you so much. Thank you so much to Hamilton-Madison team, Project Hope, Rennie, for all your outreach, and for our staff who supported, but also our behind the scenes interpreters who really, I'm sure, burned a lot of calories in the past hour just trying to interpret the content. Thank you so, so much. And we'll provide the same language interpretation for future events. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.